Welcome to the middle of the night. I am the archivist, the cursed fool bound to these old pages. During our time together, we will experience many layers of horror and psychological mazes that might have you writing a page of your own. The mad pages speak once more. All hail the Excatera. Chapter 1. The Man Who Waited. The groundskeeper had long ago learned that silence was not absence. It was appetite. On the Craft property, silence did not arrive gently. It pressed against the chest like a damp cloth, heavy enough to choke. It seeped into the lungs until breathing felt like swallowing water. It pooled in corners of rooms, clung beneath the floorboards, and pulsed between the trees where moonlight refused to enter. He had lived here long enough to recognize its rhythm the way sailors recognize a sudden, still sea. Silence here was not passive. It was a pause, sharpened into a blade. The land did not stop speaking because it had nothing to say. It stopped because it was listening. And when the land listened, he obeyed. The first time he felt it, he was younger, still foolish enough to believe silence was peace. He had stood at the edge of the property, boots sinking into damp soil, and realized the birds had stopped mid-song. The creek had ceased its chatter. Even the wind had folded itself into stillness. The quiet was so complete, it felt staged, as though the world had been paused by a hand unseen. He had tried to laugh then, a nervous sound meant to break the spell. But the laugh had sounded wrong in his own ears. Too loud, too brittle, like glass cracking under pressure. The silence swallowed it whole, leaving him with the taste of iron on his tongue. From that night forward, he understood. Silence here was not emptiness. Silence was appetite. Silence was the land holding its breath, waiting for him to fail. His quarters were not a home. They were a cage disguised as shelter. The walls sweated in winter, damp patches spreading like bruises across the wood. In summer, the same boards groaned and shifted as though the structure resented the heat and wanted to shrug him off. The ceiling beams carried hairline cracks that resembled veins, and at night he sometimes imagined they pulsed faintly, as if the house itself had a circulatory system. The bed sagged in the middle, its frame older than his bones, its mattress thin enough that he could feel the iron coils pressing against his back. When he lay down, it felt less like resting and more like being swallowed. The sound of the springs was not the innocent squeak of old furniture. It was a slow exhale, a breath that did not belong to him. Sometimes he woke convinced the bed was breathing beneath him, inhaling his weight, exhaling his fear. The chair creaked whenever he sat, not with a complaint of wood, but with a sound that resembled joints grinding together. He avoided sitting too long, afraid that if he listened closely enough, he would hear words forming in the rhythm of the creaks. The table was scarred by cups and candle wax, but the scars seemed to deepen over time, as though the wood remembered every touch and resented it. The faucet bled water that was always too cold, carrying a faint, metallic tang, as though the pipes remembered blood. He sometimes let the water run just to hear it, but the sound was wrong. It did not splash or gurgle. It hissed, thin and steady, like a whisper stretched too far. He stopped drinking from it at night, afraid that whatever memory the pipes carried might seep into him. He had tried to soften the room once, a horseshoe nailed above the door, a photograph of his mother tucked into the wall, a prayer whispered before sleep. The horseshoe split open with a sound like bone breaking. The photograph blurred slowly over days, the face dissolving until only the outline of shoulders remained. The prayer came back to him in whispers, spoken by something unseen, something that did not believe. After that, he stopped trying. The room was not his. It belonged to the property. He was tolerated inside it, the way a rat is tolerated in the walls, until the trap is set. He learned to move carefully within it, never slamming doors, never raising his voice, never letting the candle burn too long. He learned that the room had moods, and moods had consequences. Routine became his armor, but armor rusts. Routine was the fence he built around his mind. It did not keep wolves out forever, but it kept him from wandering into the trees alone, with his throat exposed. Morning began with the walk. He rose before the sun, boots already laced, jacket stiff with old sweat and weather. The air at dawn was sharp, carrying the smell of damp soil and iron. He walked the property line slowly, deliberately, eyes scanning for changes that no one else would notice. The fences leaned in places, their wood swollen from rain, nails rusted into orange blossoms. He touched each post as he passed, feeling for tremors, for warmth, for anything that suggested the land had shifted overnight. The gate latch was always checked twice, once to confirm it was closed, once to confirm it had not been tampered with. He had learned that locks here did not fail naturally. They failed with intent. The stone wall near the creek was inspected for cracks, for stones that had moved, for carvings that had not been there the day before. Sometimes he found symbols shallowly etched into the rock, lines too deliberate to be accidents. He never touched them. He simply noted their presence and walked on. The trees leaned toward the drive, branches stretching like fingers. He trimmed them when he could, but they grew back faster than nature allowed. He suspected the land wanted them that way, wanted the path narrowed, wanted the house hidden. The ornamental ironwork at the manor's front steps was always colder than sunlight, colder than metal should be. He pressed his palm against it each morning, a ritual of acknowledgement. The chill sank into his skin, a reminder that the house knew he was there. Afternoons were for repairs, nails driven into wood that splintered in unnatural patterns, hinges that rusted faster than they should, locks that resisted being fixed. He patched holes that reappeared days later, mended fences that sagged again by dusk. The work was endless, repetitive, and futile, but he did it anyway. Routine was not about progress. Routine was about survival. Evenings were quieter. He ate early, food plain and unseasoned, as though flavor itself might attract attention. The radio was kept low, voices murmuring in the background like charms against the silence. News, weather, sermons, songs, all reduced to whispers. Shadows stretched longer than the room, bending across the floor in shapes that did not match the furniture. He never let the house go completely dark. A candle burned in the corner, its flame steady, its light thin but persistent. Darkness here was not emptiness. Darkness was invitation. Nights were the hardest. He slept, dressed, boots pointed toward the door, flashlight ready. He did not believe it made him safer. He believed it made him faster. He wanted his body to believe it could leave quickly. Sometimes he woke certain that something had leaned close enough to taste his breath. On those nights, he lay still, eyes open, waiting for the silence to release him. Routine was armor, but armor rusts.
Must step forward. made it this far, it means
The manor did not sit on the land. It fed on it. By day, it pretended to be a postcard. White paint stretched too tight over bones, pillars gleaming in sunlight, windows reflecting sky like polished glass. From a distance, it could almost pass for a photograph in a brochure. Weddings, history tours, a proud family story. But the closer you came, the more the facade thinned. The paint was too clean, too deliberate, as though it had been reapplied, not to preserve beauty, but to conceal rot. The windows were too uniform, too dark, like eyes that refused to blink. At night, the manor revealed its hunger. Hallways lengthened when you walked them alone, each step stretching the corridor until you felt you would never reach the end. Doors thickened, their weight unnatural, as though they resisted being opened, not out of neglect, but out of will. Mirrors delayed, reflections lagging half a second behind, forcing you to wonder if the figure staring back was yours. The architecture behaved like a predator. Staircases breathed, exhaling drafts that smelled faintly of damp stone. Wallpaper patterns shifted when you weren't looking, curling into shapes that resembled eyes, teeth, or wounds. Windows blinked, shutters closing and opening without wind. The house was not a structure, it was a body, and the body's hunger. There were places it did not enter. The West Wing, where the air felt thick and wet, as though the walls themselves were sweating. The locked parlors, doors sealed even during parties, silence pressing against them like a held breath. The basement staircase, descending into a quiet, too deep for plumbing. A silence that felt like the earth itself had swallowed sound whole. And the upstairs mirror, the one that did not reflect the hallway the way a mirror should. He had seen what it did to people who stared. He remembered the old housekeeper decades ago, pausing in front of the upstairs mirror with a cloth in her hand. She frowned, tilted her head, as though she could solve the puzzle if she just tried hard enough. She stood there too long. Then she whispered something to her own reflection, something miraculous happens, and the reflection smiled back. Half a second later, she left the property the next day, packed her bag. You stop playing small. You become your own guide, your own protector, your own liberator. Like she was holding herself. And in doing so, you become a lighthouse for others, for those who are waking up, confused, afraid, torn between the angel and the demon within them. You become proof that wholeness is possible. The world needs you now more than ever. In the way the house shifted, when felt it in the way the house shifted, when he walked its halls, the way the silence deepened when he lingered too long near forbidden doors. The manor was not indifferent to him. It was aware. It was patient. It was waiting. And waiting changed a man. He stayed because he had been instructed to stay. Not requested, not asked. Instructed. The memory of that day was carved into him as sharply as the tally marks on his wall. He remembered the exact smell of the room, dust and paper, faint traces of tobacco, and the way the light fell through the blinds, slicing the air into narrow bars. He remembered the tone of the voice across the table, calm, practiced, dry, like the words had been spoken many times before and would be spoken many times again. He had been younger then, stronger in the body, weaker in the mind, still capable of thinking he could argue. The man across the table wore a suit that seemed older than fashion itself, fabric stiff, tie knotted too tightly. His face was unremarkable, the kind you forgot as soon as you looked away, but his eyes were steady, and his voice carried the weight of inevitability. The Kraft family is complicated, the man said. Certain matters are handled privately. Some things are better left alone. The estate has a legal framework like any other: wills, trusts, obligations that move quietly beneath the surface. The words were ordinary. The tone was not. Then the man leaned forward a fraction, and the air in the room seemed to thicken. When the boy turns 24, he said, you will contact the family's attorney. The groundskeeper frowned. What boy? The answer came without hesitation. You'll know. He tried to laugh, because humans laugh when something is too strange to accept. But the laugh died in his throat. The man did not laugh back. It wasn't the words that frightened him. It was the certainty behind them, the way the instruction did not depend on his cooperation. It wasn't something they hoped he would do. It was something they were simply informing him would happen. He asked, carefully, and if I don't? A pause. Not ominous, not theatrical. Just a pause, as if the question was being translated into a language it didn't deserve. You will, the man said, and you won't understand why until it's already done. Then, softer, not kinder, just softer. We are not asking you to like it. We are asking you to be present when the time comes. That night he dreamed of a boy standing at the edge of a field, with his back turned, looking toward the manor, as if it were calling him. The boy did not move. The boy did not speak. But the groundskeeper woke with the taste of iron in his mouth, and the certainty that he had been shown something real. After that, the dreams became part of the routine. They arrived with the same inevitability as dawn, as certain as rust, as steady as rot. At first, he tried to resist them. He fought sleep, sat upright in the chair until his neck ached, paced the floor until his legs trembled. But exhaustion always won, and when it did, the dreams came. They did not wait for him to fall deeply asleep. They slipped in at the edges, in the shallow moments when his body sagged, but his mind still flickered. Ink crawled up his arms like veins, reversing direction. It did not stain. It invaded. Black lines threaded beneath his skin, pulsing faintly as though his body had been rewritten in a language he could not read. He clawed at them in the dream, nails tearing skin, but the ink did not bleed. It simply sank deeper, claiming him, and blood filled corridors, rising smooth and deliberate, obeying rules he did not know. It did not splash or surge. It rose with the patience of tide thick as oil, climbing walls, swallowing doors. He waded through it, boots dragging, breath shallow, certain that if he fell he would never rise again. The blood was not violent, it was obedient, and obedience was worse. Laughter warped into sobbing, then back again, until he could not tell which was worse. The sound echoed through the corridors, bouncing off stone, stretching thin until it became unrecognizable. Sometimes it sounded like his own voice. Sometimes it sounded like the boy's. Sometimes it sounded like the house itself, amused and grieving at once. Other nights, the dreams were quieter, and those were worse. Footsteps matched his perfectly, each one landing a fraction of a second after his own, as though something walked just behind him, mimicking him, learning him. He never saw it. He never turned. He knew that turning would mean recognition, and recognition would mean surrender. Stones appeared at the property line, carved with shallow symbols that pulsed faintly warm. He touched them once in the dream, and the warmth sank into his palm, spreading up his arm, settling in his chest. He woke with his hand burning, the skin unmarked, but the sensation lingering for hours. Sometimes, rarely, he dreamed of blood in ordinary places. Blood in sinks, pooling calmly as though it belonged there. Blood in seams of furniture, seeping slowly, patiently. Blood moving against gravity, climbing walls, dripping upward. These dreams were not spectacular. They were consequential. They suggested that the rules had changed, that the ordinary had been rewritten. The dreams did not fade with waking. They clung to him, sticky as cobwebs, heavy as damp cloth. He carried them into daylight, into routine, into silence. He began to suspect that the dreams were not dreams at all, but contracts written in sleep. Agreements he had not signed, obligations he had not accepted, but obligations nonetheless. And each night, the pressure grew. That night, the dream deepened. He stood in the fields under daylight, bleached of all color. The crops were hollow, stalks emptied politely, as though something had drained them without violence, without mess. His hands were black with ink, crawling back up his wrists, as if reclaiming him. Veins rewritten in a language that pulsed faintly beneath the skin. The manor loomed, larger, wronger, drawn from memory instead of sight. Its windows were dark, uniform, like eyes refusing to blink. One window closed, quiet, final. The sound of it shutting was not wood against wood, not glass against frame. It was the sound of a throat closing. The ground opened beneath him. No rumble, no warning, just absence. He fell. Stone corridor. Walls slick with damp. Symbols burned faintly, like embers refusing to die. The air was sealed, heavy, remembering how to breathe, but refusing to. Each step echoed too loudly, as though the corridor wanted him to hear himself, wanted him to recognize the trespass of his own existence. The gate waited, not open, not closed. Simply there. Its presence was not architectural. It was a tension. It was a question without words, a demand without voice. He understood instinctively. The gate did not require keys. It required recognition. Blood rose from the floor, smooth, obedient, thick as oil. It climbed his boots, his calves, his thighs. It did not splash. It did not resist. It accepted him. His body belonged to the corridor now. He tried to move, but the blood held him gently, firmly, like hands pressing him into place. The laughter returned, stretched so thin it nearly became crying. It echoed from nowhere, from everywhere, from the walls themselves. It was not sound. It was pressure, vibrating in his bones, reminding him that he was not alone. Then the blood fled. It did not drain. It did not vanish. It fled as though summoned elsewhere, leaving him standing in silence so sharp it cut. Silence snapped into place. It was not absence. It was verdict. A figure stood where the gate had been, not open, not closed, simply there. The boy's hood was low, shadow swallowing his face, but the groundskeeper knew him. Recognition was not visual. It was marrow. The name pressed against his skull, like a whisper he could not refuse. Joseph Allen Kraft. The boy's eyes were calm, in a way that was not human calm. They did not flicker, did not search, did not betray thought. They were not eyes that looked. They were eyes that accepted. Eyes that had already agreed to something unbearable. Behind Joseph, the corridor trembled. The vibration was not sound, but frequency, deep and steady, resonating in the bones. It was the hum of something waking up, something stitched together from silence and blood. And then it appeared. A grin flickered in the dark, stitched, too wide, too certain, too delighted. It did not belong to Joseph. It belonged to the corridor. It belonged to the hunger. The grin stretched across nothing, teeth too many, lips too thin, a smile that was not expression, but verdict. It flickered once, twice, then vanished, leaving only the echo of its certainty. The groundskeeper braced for words, but none came. Instead, the silence deepened, pressing against him like a weight. The boy's lips moved slowly, deliberately, but the sound was swallowed before it reached him. He realized the corridor was not allowing speech. It was allowing performance. The boy raised his hand. Symbols on the walls flared, pulsing in rhythm with the gesture. The air thickened, heavy with recognition. The groundskeeper felt his chest tighten, his pulse quicken, his thoughts fragment. He tried to look away, but the boy's presence held him, pinned him, demanded him. Joseph's hand lowered. The symbols dimmed. The silence snapped back into place. The groundskeeper's knees buckled. He fell to the floor, palms pressed against a stone, slick with damp. He tried to breathe, but the air was too thick, too heavy, too deliberate. He realized the corridor was not a place. It was a stage, and Joseph was not a boy. He was an actor. The stitched grin flickered again, wider this time, teeth gleaming in the dark. The groundskeeper felt his heart pinched between fingers, squeezed until it stuttered. He understood then. The grin was not mocking him. It was welcoming him. Joseph stepped forward. The corridor narrowed. The walls pressed closer. The symbols burned brighter. The silence deepened. The grin widened. The groundskeeper closed his eyes, but the image remained. He woke with a strangled gasp, throat scraped raw as though he had been screaming into stone. His body convulsed once, twice, before settling into a tremor that would not leave. Sweat clung to him, cold and sticky, as though the dream had followed him into waking. His chest heaved, lungs dragging air that felt heavier than it should, as if the atmosphere itself had thickened overnight. The candle burned beside his bed. It had not been lit. He had not struck a match, had not touched the wick, had not asked for flame. Yet there it was, steady and deliberate, its light thin but unyielding. It did not flicker. It did not waver. It did not behave like fire. It behaved like attention. He stared at it, chest tight, lungs shallow. The flame was too still, too patient. It was not consuming wax. It was not consuming wick. It was consuming him. The silence pressed harder now, heavier than the dream, heavier than the corridor. It was not absence. It was verdict. The candle was the witness. He tried to look away, but the flame followed him, not physically, not with movement, but with presence. Wherever his eyes landed, the candle was there, burning in the corner of his vision, reminding him that he was being watched. He did not touch it. He did not blow it out. He understood instinctively. Interacting with the wrong detail turns a message into a conversation. And he was not interested in conversation. The room felt smaller. The walls leaned inward, shadows stretching longer than they should. The air smelled faintly of iron, faintly of damp stone, faintly of something that did not belong. He pressed his palms against the mattress, feeling the coils beneath, and realized the bed was breathing again. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, toward the wall. The tally marks were there, carved into the wood, shallow but certain, scars of waiting. He had made them himself, one for each day endured, one for each night survived. But tonight, they looked different. Tonight, they looked alive. The grooves seemed deeper, darker as though ink had seeped into them. He leaned closer, breath shallow, and realized the marks were not static. They pulsed faintly, in rhythm with his heartbeat. He recoiled, pressing his back against the bed frame, eyes locked on the wall. The tally marks were not numbers anymore. They were veins. They were sentences. They were contracts written in wood. He closed his eyes, but the image remained. The candle burned. The tally marks pulsed. He realized then that he was no longer waiting for the boy. He was waiting for the house, and the house was waiting for him.
Yeah, keep it low.